Latin America right now is the third region of the world with the largest share of cryptocurrency transactions by volume. The strongest asset for crypto adoption in Latin America are stablecoins.
Gaming, what it ultimately brings is it allows people to have a source of entertainment where it otherwise wouldn't be possible. Specifically, mobile gaming, I think, is great.
El Salvador has more than 6,000 bitcoins, and that places them as the sixth country in the world with more Bitcoin. Hello, everybody. We're live. This is Sav. I'm with my good friend Kush, and we're feeling the New Year's vibes. How's everything, man?
I'm doing really well. Doing really well. New Year's always lots of fun. Nice collective moment of transition and regrowth, rebirth. So it's a really nice New Year's. Glad we're here, January 2nd, in the studio, ready to hit the road. It's going to be a really big year, so we don't want to waste a single moment of it.
Yeah, it was. Maybe it was a slow week for news of crypto in Latin America, but we have a couple of really interesting things prepared. We're going to analyze the most recent Chainalysis report, analyzing the data on Latin America. Also, El Salvador seems like they're never on a slow week. They're always doing something. Max Kaiser dropped some announcements that it seems that they want notes, Bitcoin notes, in all houses of El Salvador, and also Argentina. What's happening with deregulation? So let's start, man. And remember, if you're listening, subscribe to our newsletter. Next week, we're going to do predictions. In a couple of weeks, we're going to do some detailed deep dives on specific companies in Latin America, some really interesting companies. So let's start. Let's analyze first the Chainalysis report on that dropped a couple of weeks ago about Latin America. And Kush, what I want to do is tell you a little bit of the statistics that Chainalysis dropped and see what do you think, what are your reactions. And the first thing I want to analyze is looking at how the market share of crypto in the world, in Latin America right now, is around of 9.1% of all cryptocurrencies received in the world, is 9.1% in Latin America. What do you think about this number? Do you think it's small, it's big? It's around of $415 billion in 2024. What are your takes here?
Yeah, I mean, Latin Americans represent less than 9% of the global population, right? So there's about 650 million of us. So if you just look at it purely on sort of a population basis, it's actually quite a high number relative to what's happening. I think the really interesting aspect here, and we're going to dive into this a little bit later, is growth rate as well. Because I think ultimately, like, you can look at these numbers sort of like objectively at a really high level, but what's also incredibly important too is like, well, how much is this region growing as well, right? Yeah, so this chart right here I think is fascinating too. So if we look at this chart, the fastest growing region in the world is Latin America, right? And we've seen some regions decline as well. So walk us through here for those that are maybe listening on Spotify, like what are we seeing? What chart is this? And why is this important?
Yeah, so let's take a look at this. This is a trend line of all cryptocurrency transactions by regions. And what we see is that in the last quarters, uh, Latin America was around 15%, and now we're getting close to 20%. And the thing that we need to analyze here is, in order for Latam to win part of the market share, someone need to lose. They need to lose a little bit of market share. So the way that they are, the regions that lost market share are North America, and this one is Western Europe. So what I see here is that Latin America right now is the third region of the world with the largest share of cryptocurrency transactions by volume. And here my take is that it's obvious that Latin America is a place where we need crypto more than in developed countries. And when you do the conjunction of needing crypto and a big population that it's able to implement this technology, this is where this trend lines meet. And also, one really interesting thing that I saw on Chainalysis report, Kush, is that also Latin America is the second region of the world that is growing faster year over year. The fastest growing region of the world is sub-Saharan Africa, but they are a really small region. And then the follow up is Latin America, and we're growing over 40% in a yearly basis. So if you join the market share versus growth, I think that we are set for a 2025 that it's really bullish for adoption in Latam.
Yeah, I mean, 2025 is going to be huge for the region. It's right. We've talked a little bit about sort of some rumors around a really big Ethereum conference happening here next year. Crecimiento's going down in March. There's a bunch of pop-up cities taking place in the region. So purely from a ecosystem perspective, it's going to be a big year for the region. From an adoption standpoint, like the data is showing that Latin America's fastest growing region in the world. So therefore, we can assume, predictably, if markets continue to do quite well, Latin America will stay on core. We can presume that Latin America will maintain sort of its pace and be able to keep up with being at least one of the fastest growing regions. And I think it just like comes down to what we always talk about here, and like why we do this podcast and why we do the work that we do, because we believe that Latin America has the perfect recipe for actually needing crypto. And crypto isn't this like nice to have thing, it's just a complete necessity, right? And I think it's just generally like the narrative that I think a lot of people are engaged with and believe in, right? And so whether we see it with having these incredibly extractive financial institutions, really poor governance structures, high inflation, you name it, there are a lot of reasons why we need crypto, and the data is just basically starting to show that and demonstrate that. The really cool thing is like energy begets energy, as we said last time, right? And so the more energy that comes into the region by way of these different conferences, by investment, by more protocols looking to engage here, just the ecosystem will continue to grow and flourish. So, I'm super excited for our next podcast. This is gonna be focused on predictions for the year and like what we see being super important, and also backing it with like what companies are already doing a really awesome job in the region as well. So that's my take, and super excited for what's coming up for the region. But yeah, I mean, how do you feel? Because we're obviously very Latin America pilled. Do you feel that much of the rest of the world is? Do you feel people are actually waking up to the current state of crypto in the region? Like, how are people generally sort of perceiving the world from that are not from the region?
Hmm. My take here is that in Latin America, we have a really fertile ground for user adoption around crypto. And as we've said, I think that specifically in Mexico, crypto adoption is going to happen in the backend with companies like Felix Pago, like Kappa, Koiwe, a lot of interesting things happening. And what I've seen is also that there are a lot of great founders that are not Latam founders building for this market. Because being completely critic of the region, I think that we still have a gap of talent around founders. So some North American founders are coming to Mexico and starting companies, coming to Latam and starting companies. Um, Also, an important take is that I think that, well, Latin America is not a place, or some regions of Latin America are not places where people are used to invest. In Mexico, we don't have like a strong investment culture, but with crypto exchanges and wallets, I think that there's gonna be people that go from never investing, never have had investing anything, to degening into like an AI meme coin. It's gonna be like these places of in some places of the world that went from the Telegram to high speed internet, right? And those gaps are really interesting to see. And I think that and it's I don't think this is just a matter of fact that the strongest asset for crypto adoption in Latin America are stablecoins. Stablecoins have been super strong, having getting a lot of traction. And take a look at this chart. This chart is really crazy. So what we're looking at right now is a comparison of the volume, the monthly stablecoin volume versus the value of the USD Rs, Argentinian peso, and you can clearly see that devaluation drives a lot of volume on stablecoins. Around June 2024, let's say in May 2024, there were more than $60 billion of transactions in Argentina, specifically in Bitso for USD stablecoins. So this is the perfect region for stablecoins. And also, when you analyze the market share of stablecoins in each country, meaning which percentage of the transactions are stablecoins in Argentina right now is 61.8%. In Brazil is 59, Colombia 66, Mexico 47, and I think that that's gonna grow a lot. And the global average is 44%. So we're in this region that is craving stablecoins, and when you match that with things like the request for startups of Y Combinator focused on stablecoins, I think that we're going to see a lot of new products built around these specific assets of stablecoins in Latin America.
Yeah, I mean, the stable coins are all the rave, right? And whether it's big stablecoin providers looking to engage with the region, or smaller teams that are just starting off, that are building local stable coins, like I just think stable coins make a ton of sense. I mean, it was insane, right? Like if you compare how much people are transacting in Bitcoin or ETH or altcoins, you compare that to stable coins, it was like 4 or 5x increase compared to these other assets, right? So clearly stable coins are taking off in the region. And I'm excited, and I'm also like cautiously optimistic, right? Because we have seen governments try to take this CBDC like approach, and perhaps not implement it well. It's about, if you're going to sort of deploy a CBDC, just make sure it's done properly. You're not harming any citizens at the end of the day. You're taking privacy into account, and all these other things that I do fear that a lot of governments are not really doing the best job at. But again, it's like a lot of our work is, hey, let's work hand in hand with these local governments to make sure that they're actually deploying these things in ways that make sense. But yeah, I mean, listen, as always, bullish and excited to see stablecoins in particular take off in the region. I think they give people just like a huge benefit. And also at the same time, I think we need to start exploring, beyond standard stablecoin mechanisms. So thinking about like yield-bearing stablecoins, right? So instead of just like parking it and having someone else reap the benefits of the yield that you're giving them, how can we pass that yield on to users? And fortunately, there's some regulatory opportunities there that people can actually tap into as well in Latin America. How do we work with institutions, to make sure that they're perhaps passing on some of the yield into to their end banks? Hold on, let me start again. How do we work with institutions as well to start exploring the relationship between someone who banks with a large institution here, and maybe this bank is coming on chain, for example, and passing on, say, like Aave's yield, right, which on Base or Arbitrum will give you, I don't know, 6 to 10% right now, right? It's much higher than what you're getting in a lot of bank accounts in Latin America today. You're pretty much getting zero today in Latin America, which, as we know, because of inflation, is negative. So, I think it's also like the barrier to investing in this industry is much, much lower compared to what it would be, say, going through these other approaches. There's a couple of projects that I really like, for example, that offer tokenized equities. Like, I think that's great as well. It's just like reducing the friction between a user and their money. And I think that's just like really, really bullish for the region.
Have you ever seen this clip of Jeff Bezos when they ask him, why did you started Amazon? It's something like a 90s video or early 2000s. And he says, I saw this statistic showing how the internet grew triple digits year over year. And I just thought, what's the best business to start on the internet? And that was selling books online. So I think that we are at that moment in stablecoins in Latin America. And why do I say this? Because take a look at this chart, which shows the year-over-year growth of different Latam countries in terms of value received via stablecoins or in crypto generally. Uh, Venezuela is higher than 100%, so it's doubling year over year. Mexico is higher than 50%. Peru is 50 higher than 50. Chile higher than 50. Argentina around 35, between 35 and 40%. So this trend just will continue growing. We are at this Bezos moment of adoption, and it's really interesting to see this trend line. And if I were a VC in Latin America, my main thesis would be around stablecoins. What do you think about this? You know that you at Odisel take a look a lot of in different startups. You're gonna do the accelerator. What are your bets on different industries in crypto in Latin America? Stablecoins. What else?
Yeah, so I definitely think that stablecoins are just, you can't look over it in the region, for all the reasons we just went through. I do think that making DeFi more accessible to people is another area that I'm really bullish on as well. So like this intersection of Infinex, which brings seamless user experience, meets Nubank. There's like a product idea, and I know a few people are working on this. It's hard because there's sort of like some educational barriers that people have to overcome and become quite comfortable. But if you can do it right, and I do believe someone can do it right, democratizing access to DeFi through a very simple front end will be a winning product as well. I think gaming is another sector, although it's funny because I think a lot of the games that we actually end up using in Latin America tend to be not Latin American games. They're usually North American or Asian games. So I do think that we need to have more local teams working on games that are more contextualized, for the region as well. There's another one, I don't know, even something just is more tropicalized. The region I think will do quite well. Um, those two verticals are the two verticals that I'm most bullish on. Um, but I do think that there will be more generalizable things that come out of the region built by Latin American founders that are applicable throughout, right? So things like AI agents, which again is a huge narrative. But there's a couple of teams, and this isn't like just for Latin America, but I have seen folks work on, hey, how do we make like onboarding into these financial services like much easier through agents? And maybe you interact with these agents on WhatsApp, for example, right? And you're like, hey, I need you to rebalance my portfolio and allocate like this percentage to the majors and then allocate the remaining percentage to these like long tail assets. So I think that's another area that I think is also worthwhile looking into, but it sort of fits into the like seamless DeFi experience. But yeah, those are a few areas that I'm personally allocating towards right now.
Yeah. And the first thing that you mentioned is the thing that I talk a lot about, the DeFi mullet, DeFi in the back, fintech in the front. Latin America is the best place to do that, definitely, I think. Moving on to the next analysis that I'd like to discuss, we saw this news about 6 trends that position Latin America as a great place for crypto, and most of them are things that we've discussed, like currency devaluation, high penetration of internet and technology, and several other things. But one thing that I think that we haven't analyzed in past episodes is gaming. So gaming is a fast growing trend in the region. In 2024, based on Statista data, the gaming market created $2.4 billion in revenue in Brazil, then 1.71 billion in Argentina, Colombia, and Chile. No, in Mexico, sorry. And Argentina, Colombia, and Chile created more than $500 million in revenue. So I think that there is. Why is this important? Because I see an overlap in the user persona of gamers and people in crypto, and I think that that niche is gonna grow, and that niche can act as a beachhead market to attract new products. There's this really interesting company called Sura that we're partnering with them in Bando. They have a gaming wallet that it makes a lot of sense for the developed market, for the global south, and specifically for Latin America. So based on different companies that you've seen, what are the most exciting things that you've analyzed in gaming in the region?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's gaming, what it ultimately brings is it allows people to have a source of entertainment where it otherwise wouldn't be possible. Specifically, mobile gaming, I think is great. So I've seen, for example, this intersection of gaming, also gaming to earn, is something else that I think will really, really take off. We saw it actually in Asia, and like obviously that wasn't sort of a desired outcome as far as how things ended up going down. But allowing people to earn tokens will be important, right? And so it's like, hey, you're investing time and resources into this gaming vertical. Well, great. Here's like some sort of incentive and reward, and you can earn a fair amount of money playing these different games, right? Perhaps more so than you would earn at your traditional job. In which case, okay, you're unlocking economic opportunity for folks as well. I do think that if there are people out there who are considering going into Latin America and are working on gaming projects, has to be mobile first. Absolutely must be. We have incredibly high mobile penetration rate. We have more mobile phones than toilets. And so, you're not going to make it if you're not going a gaming native way. And then being able to provide sort of an easy on and off ramp too for these folks as they earn tokens is another key important point, right? We spoke previously about WorldCoin, for example, and basically as soon as you scan your iris, there's a guy right next to the iris scanning stand in Bogota or name your city, and he's going to buy these tokens for you OTC, and he'll just give you cash for your world tokens. So being able to sort of remove that friction point of, hey, you've earned these tokens and now here you go, here's how you off ramp them. I think that's going to be another key like component to integrate into these different games. How do you see the gaming market in the region, and who have you seen like really, really take off, or what do you see that opportunity in the region looking like?
I'm not an expert in the gaming market. I'm deep diving, but specifically what you said is the main trends that I see. So a lot of people have access to mobile phones and they want to make some money out of it. And I think that gaming, it's really important. My bearish take there is that these incentives dry out. It's like yield farming, right? Like gaming farming, basically they trend to zero. But I think that I'm seeing a lot of different products that are focused on first building a fun game and afterwards putting the tokenomics on it. So I think that also gaming will be embedded in a lot of wallets and on different products. So it's a really hard market to analyze because it's really a web 2 market. But looking the convergence of the user persona in Latin America, I think that there's a big space or a really interesting space for crypto and gaming. And let's move on to the next news that we saw this week. So right now, El Salvador has more than 6,000 bitcoins, and that places them as the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the sixth country in the world with more Bitcoin, just after USA, China, the UK, Ukraine, Bhutan, and then El Salvador. And I think that the interesting thing here is that they might be the country in the world with the most aggressive and clear strategy for investing Bitcoin. And last week we discussed how El Salvador and Argentina signed an agreement to collaborate on how to work on crypto adoption. And Max Kaiser tweeted this Bitcoin maximalist that he lives in Argentina and is really close to Nayib Bukele. He said that one of the resolutions of Nayib Bukele this year was to have one Bitcoin node in every house. So a lot to unpack here. What do you think?
Bukele keeps killing it, man. This is what we ended our last podcast with. This is what we're talking about this time. It's what we've talked about just every single podcast, pretty much. And one, we already outlined kind of the benefits for El Salvador and its people investing into Bitcoin, right? There's pretty much no better asset that they can invest in with regards to the risk reward for the people over the course of a long enough term horizon. So props there. Yeah, just the strategy of we're going to buy Bitcoin every single day. And when we feel like it, maybe we'll buy 10. Also has clearly worked out for them. I think the Bitcoin node in every household, we'll see how that pans out. I don't know if I would bet money on it. Max Kaiser is also a very particular gentleman. from what I gather, and is obviously very, very strong, as strong-minded when it comes to the way El Salvador should think about Bitcoin, and its relationship with other crypto assets as well, which I think is a detriment to the country, to be honest, over the long term. But I think it's sort of a matter of waking up to that, and people oftentimes like go way far out on the long tail and they're like, well, look at this like crazy crypto like thing that went down, like only Bitcoin. I'm like, there's always a middle ground here, and there's always a way for you to engage and find utility without giving up values of decentralization and so forth, right? So I think the more El Salvador opens itself up to crypto assets that are not just Bitcoin, and also technologies that are not just Bitcoin, which is in and of itself by design a antiquated, slow moving chain, I think El Salvador will gain a lot, right? And so what I'm hoping is we'll actually see the country experiment a lot when it comes to governance and budgeting and so forth, um, leveraging distributed technologies. But I think it's just a matter of time. I probably will be going to El Salvador in the next couple of weeks, so maybe the next podcast or two might be recorded from there. So always happy to share kind of insights and findings once I'm actually on the ground. Yeah. How do you see El Salvador, and like, why do you think it just keeps coming up over and over again for us? And, what can we learn? What can Latin Americans learn, countries and governments learn from their strategy? And, if you were to go to a head of state elsewhere, what would you say, hey, this is what you need to be thinking about taking into account El Salvador's strategies today?
Yeah, I think that we continuously discuss El Salvador because they just keep doing things. For example, in Espacio Crypto, we constantly talk about Coinbase because they just ship, right? They did base, then with all what's happening around AI agents in Coinbase, so we always talk about them. So I think that that's the same case for El Salvador and Frontera. And how I see this strategy of El Salvador is that they are sticking to it. I mean, Najib Bukele announced Bitcoin as legal tender a couple of years ago, and he's stick to it. He's kept the execution, and I think that also this helps the country, like in the PR department. They're really happy about Bitcoin because they continuously are in the headlines, and they're not in the headlines for stuff that El Salvador was continuously in the headlines a couple of years ago. That was crime and corruption and lots of things. So I think that this element is the thing that why we keep talking about El Salvador constantly. And what I think is that basically they don't have nothing to lose, and that's why they have this such aggressive stance, because they don't have a fiat currency. They are a dollarized economy. So basically, the thing that they say is, I rather trust Bitcoin's code than the Federal Reserve because I do not have control over any of those two institutions. But Bitcoin, the code of Bitcoin and the economic policy of Bitcoin is a lot clearer. So I think that that's their bet. It's really obvious. I see El Salvador as what it can become, something like the Singapore of Latin America. Singapore was a swamp, like in the 40s, and now they're one of the most advanced financial countries in the world with a really strong government. So it's really interesting to see that evolution. And the final take to close this week's Frontera, my man Kush, is that it seems different analysts are looking at Argentinian deregulation, everything that's happening with Milei. And the news that we see is that the legal head of, one of the legal heads of Ripios, one of the largest crypto exchanges in Argentina, they're saying that deregulation is not coming yet to crypto. And why I decided to include this, because this is really bullish, because I think that Milei is focusing on other stuff first, maybe things that were more critical for the Argentinian country. And in the next, I think that in 2025 we're going to see a lot of deregulation around crypto, that's going to help move the country faster in our technology. So you were just in Argentina a couple of weeks ago. How do you see that deregulation can impact the progress of crypto adoption in Argentina?
Yeah, I mean, I think Argentina is obviously really, really bullish as far as the way that they've already managed to adopt crypto in a very grassroots way. I think now it's opening up the doors from a regulatory standpoint to be able to unlock a lot of other use cases, whether it's RWAs or ID, which is already the case, right? Everyone in Buenos Aires has already issued an ID on leveraging ZK Sync. Um, and so I think that like what we'll see is we'll just see more trending towards larger scale projects unfolding in the region that have wider implications across society. So, again, the story here is that Argentina is already really bullish. Once we get to deregulation, which is inevitable given Milei's trajectory and promise, when it comes to crypto adoption and the way that crypto is integrated throughout the country and what people can and can't do with it, if Argentina could get any more bullish, it will.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that will be the case, right? Because again, we've discussed sort of a couple of key things unfolding there this year, and we'll continue to see that trend sort of like unfold. So anyone who isn't paying attention to Argentina, which you pretty much have to be living under a rock to do so, now's the time to tune in and keep up with kind of the latest events of what's unfolding there. How do
Yeah,
you see
perfect.
Argentina sort of like unfolding? And speaking with Argentines, like how do you think they're thinking about this deregulation move and what'll come up for the country once that occurs?
I'm really bullish on Argentina. I think that it's the most bullish country in Latin America right now. And that's just because of the regulatory environment, the hunger they have, the crypto adoption. So I think that we're going to see new products coming out of that region, of that country. I really like Argentinians. They are a great people. Their country, I've never been, and this is going to be the year that I go to Argentina. And yeah, let's keep looking at what's happening there. Maybe we should bring someone from Crecimiento to get more information on everything that they're doing. Maybe some people from Velo. It's gonna be really nice to do those episodes. And man, I know that you need to run really soon, but I'm proud about us. We didn't stop during the holidays, so keeping the pace is really important. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you. I'm really bullish on Frontera, Odisea, Espacio Cripto, and Bando for 2025. So thank you. Any final takes?
Thank you, Ab. No, this has been really, really awesome, man. I love just being able to like tune in on a weekly basis into what's happening at a really macro level, be able to share those insights. We've been doing weekly recaps as well on Twitter, through the newsletter that I think people are really loving and appreciating. So let's keep it up. 2025 is our year, and Frontera is going to be home of crypto in Latin America. So pumped to keep this going, man.
Amazing. So go and follow Frontera in Twitter. Also follow us subscribe to our newsletter. And thank you for tuning in. See you next week. Have a good one.